Hey guys, this is Blake. Welcome to another episode of Kickass of Awesome. For those who haven't heard, I'm changing up the format a bit in this show. I'm going to be scripting these videos, using actual clips, and then putting a voiceover over those. Some of those episodes are going to be released on Blip if I fear there's going to be a copyright claim, but hopefully most of it will still remain on YouTube. But we'll just have to see how that goes. They're going to be no longer than 2 minutes, so don't worry, this isn't going to cut into critiquing the critics' time. But anyway, to catch up, since I'm pretty behind, I just figured I'd go ahead and review everything that I had planned in one video, which is this video here. I'm going to start from best in overall quality to worst, and the first film I'm going to be talking about is 13 Assassins. 13 Assassins is about, well, 13 assassins who team up to slay this really vicious lord. Just to make a point of how evil this guy is, the first thing you see him do in the whole movie is rape a woman and then kill her husband and chop his body into pieces. And it gets much worse from there. But what I love about it is just how tightly directed it is. The director, Takashi Miike, who's one of my favorite directors actually, he has the tendency to go pretty insane in his movies. But here he's really restrained. A lot of his usual touches are still around, like there is obviously rape, but it's done in a fairly tasteful way, and when things get really graphic, it's in a more horrific kind of way, not in the usual sleazy kind of way. And plus, it's not too crazy. I always think of probably the quintessential Takashi Miike film is Fudo, which is full of all sorts of crazy shit, but it's also really creative crazy shit. 13 Assassins isn't that crazy or creative. It is, for the most part, just a big-bone samurai epic. And that's what I love about it. It's Takashi Miike at his most normal, but also at his best. Pretty much, whenever the film wants to be epic, it is. It's full of plenty of gorgeously framed wide shots. But when it wants to, it can also really reel itself in. And during the more intimate scenes, they're very claustrophobic. They're very moodily lit. It just focuses completely on the characters and their plight. It has this really cool, almost like paranoid kind of atmosphere during these sequences that I think really make a nice contrast to the more epic and more, I guess, stunning sequences that people tend to remember the most of these films. But it also has great acting, even better dialogue, and the action when it happens is just fantastic. Now the first hour doesn't have a whole lot of action, but during the last 45 minutes or so, I mean, it's pretty much non-stop action. It's pretty much one big-ass battle. And it is epic. When it comes to samurai films, you can't really expect them to be action films. For the most part, they're just period-piece dramas. But the action in this film, once it gets going, it's phenomenal. But at the same time, samurai action is much more simple than, let's say, kung fu action. For the most part, just people only slicing at each other. But what makes this film so good in terms of its action is just how they use it. One thing I really like is that you could tell when the characters are getting exhausted. I mean, these are 13 guys fighting an army of 200. And they're not just killing people non-stop. They're clearly getting exhausted by the end of the battle. And you always feel that. You're with these characters as they become more and more injured and exhausted. I also love how they do certain things that make the fights more badass, or seem more badass than they probably were. Like, for example, the ending fight, the characters are fighting in mud. Now, what makes that really cool is the fact that you have this actual fight scene and the actors aren't slipping around. I can't imagine how hellish that would be to film. So the film it also has some real great sound effects, too. That's one thing I think the samurai films really need to focus on. The sound effects make all the fight scenes seem more authentic, and that's really it. When it comes to, once again, samurai films, you're not going to get top-notch choreography and compared to like kung fu films like the works of Jet Li or Jackie Chan. They're more simple and straightforward, but the goal is to be more believable and also a little stylish, and I think 13 Assassins really pulls that off. So I thought that was a great movie all in all. I thought Takashi Miike's weird characteristics really added to the film. There's this one part that is incredibly disturbing, but classic Miike. His weirdness almost adds to the film's character. The only fault it has is they didn't feel the 13 Assassins were fleshed out enough. I personally couldn't tell most of them apart. That's what keeps it inferior compared to Seven Samurai. But I've heard that the cut I watched actually cut out some of that, so that might explain a few things. The next film I'm going to be talking about, and yes, I have notes because I have to keep track of everything I'm saying when I review multiple movies, is Little Big Soldier. Now, this stars Jackie Chan, but it is definitely not your usual Jackie Chan film. Jackie actually has tried to do drama before, but usually it fails. The Myth, for example, whenever it tried to be dramatic, I thought it was incredibly flat, and I thought he really failed at creating an epic-type film. But when it was, I can't even really go into that film without going more into it. But it's half a good movie when it takes place in the present, but when it goes into the past, it's just weak. Robin Hood was kind of silly, but was okay. The Karate Kid remake, I thought actually was surprisingly good, but still, it just wasn't as good as the original, and you can't help but compare the two. But and then New Police Story had some really good moments, but for the most part, his acting just didn't seem to work. But here, this is definitely Jackie's best performance all around. Before I talk about how it is a drama, and he also did that Shinjuku incident, which is not really a martial arts film at all, so I'm not even going to talk about it, even though it's pretty good. But this film is more like a light comedy adventure, but it also is very dramatic. And it's really hard to talk about, but it has a really intelligent script. The characters are all very interesting. They completely invert our expectations. The characters go down paths you don't expect them to go down. And what I really love about it, too, is that nothing in the film tries too hard to get our attention. The film, for example, is very gorgeously shot, but not that gorgeously shot. It's enough to make the film look good, but not look too good to the point where it's taking away from other aspects of the film. The film is funny, but not too funny. The fight scenes are good, but not that good. By this point, obviously, Jackie Chan's getting pretty old. And actually, the cooler parts of the fights tend to come from other actors in the film. In fact, I often felt that Jackie Chan really was just there to make everybody else look good in terms of how he fought. But there's something really smooth, nicely realistic, but not boringly realistic about the fight scenes. And once again, they're peppered with some really cool moments. And while the film isn't action-packed, it spaces out its action very well. So I was never bored. I cared, like I said, about the characters. The ending is heart-wrenching. It is definitely one of the most tear-jerking moments I've ever seen in Hong Kong cinema. And it's just an all-around, I think, really good movie. Whether it's great or good, I'm really not sure. I feel that if I call it a great film, your expectations are going to disappoint you. But if I call it a good film, it almost feels like it's selling it short. So just somewhere in the middle. And I definitely would recommend everybody check it out. The third film is Blood of the Ninja, which actually contains no ninja. This film is directed by and stars Jimmy Wang Yu. Now, Jimmy Wang Yu was probably known most in Hong Kong for The One-Armed Swordsman, but here he's a little bit more known for Master of the Flying Guillotine. He also did the movie that would eventually become Kung Pao. The main character in Kung Pao was pretty much Jimmy Wang Yu in the Hong Kong version, but was digitally removed in place of Steve Odekirk. But the one thing with Jimmy Wang Yu is that his movies, while they initially started out respectable, they became more and more stupid but entertaining. And Blood of the Ninja is cool, but it's also really shoddily made. The editing is really bad at parts with some really embarrassing continuity errors. The dubbing is bad, but in a laughable kind of way. What else is there? Really, that's, I guess, all. It's just, there is something just off about the way it was filmed. But at the same time, the film makes up for it by having some really interesting characters. The fighting is almost non-stop, and it has a much better narrative than Master of the Flying Guillotine did, while it's not as memorable as that film. And one thing with Jimmy Wang Yu is usually I think he's kind of boring, but here he's really charismatic. He's got a lot of personality. The film actually uses his height to its advantage. Jimmy Wang Yu is actually pretty tall for an Asian person, but most of his movies tend to undermine this. But here he just seems bigger than everybody else. He's not a real-life martial artist, but there's something about his attitude that suggests that he really could kick your ass, and probably do so with ease. And in real life, he was kind of an asshole. But in fact, I think he was indicted for murder once. But when he's using a spear throughout most of the movie, and he actually sells the skills pretty well, even though he wasn't a real-life martial artist. When he comes at somebody, I felt he was actually going after him. And while I wouldn't call the choreography to be exceptional, I still thought it was really good, and I think it was definitely one of the better examples of Jimmy Wang Yu's work in terms of choreography. The only time his lack of martial arts skills really becomes apparent is when he goes into hand-to-hand combat mode. Then he starts dropping his guard, but at the same time he makes up for it with such energy. I mean, this guy, like I said, when he comes at you, it's almost, it seems like he's really trying to hurt whoever he's fighting. And I just thought the film really benefited from that. So even though, yeah, it's kind of bad, it is, I think, very entertaining, and it's a real fast-paced film. I definitely recommend it for kung fu fans, I guess, but not necessarily as a great kung fu film. Let's see, what's next? True Legend. Now, this is one I actually heard some really good things about and some really bad things about, and I got to really hurry this up, actually. But it is, I think, a really good movie. Like Little Big Soldier, it's trying its best not to let one aspect take away too much from the other. The director intentionally made the choreography not great, and the cinematography, while it looks good, it's not great either. My only problem with it is the narrative, I think, kind of sucks. At first, it's just a really straightforward kung fu film, but then the plot technically ends like 80% into the movie, and like the last act is just a ripoff of Fearless, and it has some good fight scenes, but it just nothing really feels like it's necessary after the plot ends, pretty much. So they kind of fumbled when it came to the decision whether they wanted to make a more straightforward kung fu film or a character understudy kung fu film like Yip Man and Fearless were. But beyond that, I thought the fight scenes were really good in that it's one of the very few kung fu films that successfully blends traditional kung fu, but then wire fu, and then CGI fu. It all goes together really seamlessly, and I thought it really worked well, and it gave the film a nice personality. And I thought it was good, but not great. It's worth watching, but you could do without it just as much. The worst film, though, I'm talking about is, ironically, probably the best in terms of choreography, and that is Merantau. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It is pretty much Indonesia's response to Ong Bak. Now, it's not as good as Ong Bak, and I think the comparisons are really what hurt it. Now, Ong Bak was just a great action movie overall. It was non-stop, and I thought the characters were interesting. Whereas Merantau seems like it wants to be a little bit more of a character understudy. It has a lot of downtime. But when the action really gets going, it is great. It is just as good as the stuff Tony Jaa could pull off. But it's also different because he's using an art called silat. And all the blocks, grapples, punches, they just look different. I thought that was nice because it's interesting just to see something you don't see very often. And I thought that's really what gave the film its flavor. Other than that, though, especially like the last fight scenes that are really well done. The choreography is really tight and brutal, but quick. There are some really epic-looking stunts that looked so painful to. It hurt me just to watch them, but they were really good. But like I said, it's the weakest of these films because when this stuff isn't happening, it's trying to let the drama take over things, and I just thought it wasn't that compelling as a drama. It just really slowed down the pace and created sort of an uneven movie. But everybody who pretty much did this film was inexperienced, and I tend to blame that. I think they'll get better as each movie goes on, and hopefully this new guy isn't going to be the next Tony Jaa and pretty much drive his career into the ground. So I think, well, that's it pretty much. If you want to read my written reviews, just check the links in my description. I apologize that I'm really rushing through this, but I have a 15-minute limit. So that's all. I'll see you guys next time.